The story begins at sea, where a ship engulfed in flames can be seen in the distance. Nearby, a small boat carrying several men watches the destruction from afar, while screams still echo across the ocean. During their escape, the boat is struck by a powerful impact from below. One of the men leans over to check what happened in the water, but he is suddenly dragged into the depths before the other's eyes. Unable to understand what pulled him under, the others watch the scene in fear and confusion. Sometime later, a ceremony is held on Antonio Island to honor Patrick Malone, David Williams, Richard Wayne, and Norman Castle, the men recognized as the founders of the town. Meanwhile, at sea, we are introduced to Nick Castle, the owner of a boat used for tourist excursions. While promoting his service to attract customers, he works alongside his friend and employee, Spooner. At the end of the tour, Nick decides to return and asks Spooner to retrieve the anchor. During the process, it becomes snagged on a strange object at the bottom of the sea. Despite trying to stop the mechanism, Spooner realizes that the equipment continues pulling the chain. This causes the vessel to tilt sharply and nearly results in an accident. After a great deal of strain, the mysterious sack finally tears apart, allowing the anchor to be freed. As the sack rips open, several objects scatter across the seabed. Unable to save the excursion, Nick returns to the island accompanied by clearly disappointed customers. Later, Spooner appears to remind him that they still have several platforms to clean. Nick, however, says he needs to leave to buy a new clutch. Realizing his friend's true intention, Spooner jokes that it is merely an excuse to meet the girl he is interested in. He then reminds him that the young woman knows Liz and questions what would happen if she told her everything. Nick shows no concern and explains that his girlfriend has been away from the island for 6 months. Even after being warned that Liz might discover the truth, Spooner is ignored and Nick leaves. During the drive, Nick passes the newly unveiled statues and encounters Tom and Kathy, Liz's parents. Showing little interest in the founders, he asks Mayor Tom how much that tribute cost. Tom replies that it is simply a memorial. He then invites Nick to the ceremony the following morning and reminds him that his family is also part of that history. However, Nick says he will be busy and continues on his way. Later, a dense fog begins moving toward the island. At the same time, Peter Malone uses a metal detector on the beach and discovers an old watch, deciding to keep it. After he leaves, we see a skeletal hand partially buried in the sand. In town, a man notices that the seagulls are agitated, as if something had frightened them. Shortly afterward, the barking of his dogs draws his attention. When he goes to investigate, he finds one of them dead while the others continue barking frantically. Later, on his way home, Nick hears Helen Wayne pause her radio program and play a song. During the drive, he spots a strange woman on the road and offers her a ride. To his surprise, the stranger is Liz. She jokingly asks whether he has been giving rides to other women during her absence. Embarrassed, Nick denies it, and Liz simply laughs at the situation before getting into the car and kissing him. While Nick and Liz travel together, Spooner spends time with several girls alongside Sean, Nick's cousin. Sean worries that Nick might find out, but Spooner dismisses the concern. Shortly afterward, Sean becomes responsible for steering the boat while his friend continues having fun. At the marina, Nick steps away briefly to take care of something and leaves Liz alone. It is then that Peter Malone approaches and shows her the antique watch he found earlier. When she tries to take it, Peter warns her that she should not. Nevertheless, Liz ignores the warning and notices that the watch is functioning normally. Peter then remarks that it had previously stopped and explains that it came from the sea. Looking more closely at the object, Liz notices symbols that seem familiar. Before she can understand why, Nick returns, and Peter, intimidated by his presence, leaves. When questioned, Liz explains that Peter only wanted to show her a watch he had found. Nick admits that the man frightens him. Liz comments that she feels she has seen the object somewhere before, but she soon lets the matter go. Back at the lighthouse, Helen receives a call from Dan, who informs her that a dense fog has been detected approaching the island. She finds the information strange since the wind is blowing in the opposite direction, but Dan insists that his radar is not wrong. Although suspicious, Helen decides to warn the residents. On the boat, Sean hears the warning and becomes concerned. Spooner, however, dismisses it, claiming there is no sign of fog nearby. Shortly afterward, Sean notices that the vessel is experiencing problems and has lost communication. While Spooner ignores the situation, Sean goes below deck to try using the radio and request help from the Coast Guard. Without warning, a gigantic fog appears on the horizon and captures the attention of Sean and Spooner, who cannot explain its origin. Meanwhile, during the car ride, Nick questions Liz about her sudden departure from the island. She explains that she never felt connected to that place and preferred to leave without saying goodbye. The conversation takes another turn when Nick admits that he had planned to propose marriage before she left, taking Liz by surprise. Shortly afterward, a powerful impact strikes the vehicle and causes Nick to brake immediately. After the collision, Nick asks if Liz is all right. When she confirms that she is, both are startled by the sudden appearance of Father Malone. Nick asks whether he saw anything, but the priest, appearing uneasy, says he knows nothing and continues on his way. After he leaves, Nick returns to the vehicle and asks Liz once more if she is all right. On the boat, the group attempts to locate themselves using the radar when Spooner notices something ahead of the vessel. As he investigates, the equipment suddenly explodes. Despite frightening the girls, he reassures them and goes outside to investigate, leaving his knife in the cabin. Outside, Spooner comes face to face with a ghost ship and calls for Sean. However, when the young man looks, he sees nothing. At the same time, the mysterious fog surrounds the cabin. Sensing its presence, one of the girls draws a scale on the glass before heavy blows strike the boat. Moments later, the bodies of the two young women are hurled against the window, revealing that they have been killed. Soon afterward, Spooner's knife is thrown at Sean, killing him. Surrounded by the fog, Spooner is left alone while his screams echo throughout the vessel. When they arrive at Liz's house, she says goodbye to Nick and goes inside. However, the reunion with her mother does not happen as she expected. Noticing the cold reception she receives, she quickly changes her mind and returns outside. There, she finds Nick still waiting for her, admitting that he had already expected that reaction from Liz's mother. Without hesitation, Liz decides to go with him and stay at his house. During the night, Liz awakens frightened by loud knocking sounds, waking Nick, who immediately asks what happened. Still shaken, she says she saw people burning and then felt as if she were drowning. Liz reveals that these nightmares are frequent and were one of the reasons she returned to the island. Trying to comfort her, Nick says that everything will be fine and asks her to go back to sleep. Later, Liz researches the symbol found on the watch. However, as soon as she finds a match, her computer stops working. Shortly afterward, drops of water begin falling onto her. When she investigates, she notices wet footprints on the ceiling and follows them to a source from which loud banging noises emerge. Undeterred, she heads to the beach. There, she finds tracks leading toward the sea and begins hearing voices calling her name. The fog then becomes thicker, but she is startled to discover that the approaching figure is only Nick. Soon afterward, the fog disappears. The next morning, Andy finds a brush washed ashore and runs to show it to his mother, Helen. She pays little attention to the object and says she needs to leave for work. Hurt by his mother's lack of time for him, the boy walks away. Later, while cleaning the brush, Helen discovers the same symbol Liz saw on the watch. Meanwhile, Liz visits her parents' store and is once again greeted coldly by her mother. Unshaken, she continues her investigation. Helen later meets Nick and comments that she heard about Liz's return. She then asks how long Liz intends to stay and remarks that he knows the reason. Before the conversation can continue, Nick receives a phone call and Helen decides to leave. As Liz deepens her research, she links the mysterious symbol to the Prince William. Shortly afterward, Mr. Fornet Bess Latham approaches and starts a conversation with her. Taking the opportunity, Liz shows him the symbol and asks whether he knows its meaning. Latham admits that he has never seen it before, but he recognizes the name Prince William. He explains that it was a merchant vessel that traded with Shanghai. When Liz notices there are no records after 1871, she asks why. Latham explains that a leprosy epidemic struck passengers arriving from China. The disease spread throughout the region, causing many deaths, while the survivors left the island by ship. Having no more information to offer, he ends the discussion. Moments later, Nick arrives with troubling news. Uncle Hank called to report that Spooner went out to sea and has not returned. Liz interrupts her research and accompanies Nick to the marina. There, Hank explains that the group left the previous night and never came back. Fearing the loss of the boat, Nick decides to search for them before calling the Coast Guard and borrows Hank's vessel. After some time searching, they find the boat drifting. Upon entering the cabin, they discover everything destroyed, although the engine is still running. Investigating further, Nick finds Sean dead, with his eyes sewn shut, and rushes to inform Liz. Shortly afterward, the bodies of the girls are also found tangled in the boat's nets. While attempting to call for help over the radio, Liz hears knocking coming from below deck. Following the sound, she opens a freezer and finds Spooner frozen inside. The shock becomes even greater when he suddenly opens his eyes. Later, the bodies are collected by the police, and Spooner receives medical treatment. The sheriff decides to impound the boat for investigation. Nick tries to stop him, but Tom explains that the vessel is now part of the case. At that moment, Hank interrupts the conversation to inform Tom that the Coast Guard wants to speak with him. After Tom leaves, Spooner grabs Nick and insists that he hid from it. Confused, Nick asks what he means. In a panic, Spooner reveals that the fog killed everyone on the boat and that he survived only because he hid inside the freezer, where it could not enter. Nick refuses to believe the story and concludes that Spooner is in shock. Later, Nick reveals that he found a camera on the boat and asks Liz to hide it because the footage may prove that Spooner killed no one. Upon reviewing the recordings, she confirms that he was telling the truth. Shortly afterward, something catches her attention, and Liz leaves to investigate. Along the way, a wooden board gives way beneath her feet, causing her to fall into the water and lose the camera. While trying to escape, she becomes trapped in a fishing net and is pulled underwater. During the struggle, she experiences a vision of a mysterious woman. After freeing herself, Liz reaches the surface and grabs onto a nearby structure. At that moment, several bricks loosen from the wall, revealing an old diary hidden inside. Later, Helen is alone in the lighthouse when she begins hearing strange noises coming from the workroom. Soon, banging and screams echo throughout the building, frightening her. At the same time, the brush Andy found begins heating up until it bursts into flames. After extinguishing the fire with a fire extinguisher, Helen notices that marks have been left on the drawings. Concerned, she calls Andy and asks where he found the object. Upon learning that it came from the beach, she tells her son never to bring anything back from there again. However, Andy ignores the warning and convinces his babysitter to let him return to the beach. Later, Liz seeks out Father Malone and finds him in the cemetery examining an inscription. Curious, she asks about the meaning of the word, and he explains that it is an ancient biblical term. Liz then shows him the diary she found and reveals that his family's name appears within its pages. Upon taking the diary, Malone remarks that his grandfather had once told him about it. Liz explains that she found it in the old castle fishing house. Even so, the priest avoids discussing the matter further and insists that he cannot help her. Noticing how uneasy he seems, Liz presses him for answers. Visibly shaken, Malone simply tells her that she must leave the island as soon as possible and walks away. After he leaves, Liz examines the inscription again and discovers the same scale symbol she saw earlier. At the hospital, Tom and the sheriff continue questioning Spooner about the events aboard the boat. During the conversation, Tom presents the knife responsible for Sean's death, and Spooner admits that it belongs to him. Shortly afterward, Liz arrives to speak with Nick, but he asks her to wait. While waiting, Liz enters the room where the bodies have been taken. Unexpectedly, Sean rises from the gurney and grabs her, declaring that blood will be repaid with blood. Terrified, she backs away as the corpse falls to the floor once again. When the others arrive, they find Liz in shock, unable to explain what she has just witnessed. Later, she and Nick argue in a bar. Liz insists that Spooner is innocent and explains that the recording found on the boat proves it. However, when questioned, she admits that she lost the tape after falling into the water. Frustrated, Nick struggles to believe her, especially after everything that has happened. Refusing to give up, Liz shows him the diary she found and claims that the answers may be inside. As they examine its contents, they discover that one of the founders wrote a plea for God's forgiveness. Next, they look at old photographs of the town and realize that it grew suddenly around 1871. This strengthens the suspicion that something significant occurred that year. At that moment, we see the founders gathered in one of Liz's visions, taking an oath before heading out to sea. At the hospital, Tom and the sheriff discover that Spooner has escaped and begin searching for him. Meanwhile, Peter finds strange objects scattered across the beach and, after digging where his detector signals, uncovers a large buried rope. Without noticing the fog approaching, he is dragged away by the waves and disappears. Andy witnesses everything and runs home in fear. At the same time, the fog begins consuming the town. At the lighthouse, the equipment stops working and screams are heard outside. Despite Helen's warnings, Dan goes out to investigate and is set ablaze by a creature hidden within the fog. Desperate, Helen attempts to call for help, but the town's power is cut. Meanwhile, Nick and Liz continue investigating. Upon hearing Helen's distress call over the radio, the couple sets out to help Andy. During the journey, Liz keeps reading the diary and discovers that one of the founders met with Blake, a man who wanted to use the island as a home for his people. She also reveals that Blake traveled aboard a ship called the Elizabeth Dane, causing Nick to remember the ghost ship seen by Spooner. Unable to reach Andy, Helen continues traveling, growing increasingly worried. Meanwhile, the boy's babysitter becomes suspicious of the fog emerging through the house's pipes. As she investigates, she is ambushed by a creature and burned to death within seconds. On the road, Helen's car suddenly breaks down. When she notices the fog invading the vehicle, she becomes alarmed. Before she can react, a truck emerges from the mist and forces her car off the road, sending it plunging into the sea. Underwater, Helen struggles to escape the vehicle but is horrified to see a drowned figure near the window. She searches for another way out, but the creature grabs her leg. Fighting to survive, Helen breaks free, reaches the surface, and makes it back to shore. After discovering her babysitter dead, Andy hides in a room and tries to protect himself from the fog invading the house. As creatures begin attacking the door, Nick arrives and manages to rescue the boy before it is too late. Outside, they rush to the car. Their escape nearly fails when the vehicle refuses to start, but Nick eventually gets it running and escapes, running over one of the creatures in the process. During the drive, he decides to head for the lighthouse to find Helen, although Liz would rather go to town hall to look for her parents. Elsewhere on the island, Spooner and Father Malone plan to escape by boat. However, both abandon the idea when they see a ghost ship emerging from the fog and flee in terror. Shortly afterward, Nick, Liz, and Andy are involved in an accident after colliding with a vessel that appears in the middle of the road. With the impact, the story shifts into the past and finally reveals the founder's secret. After negotiating half the island with Blake and his people, they broke their promise. As soon as they received the gold, they drew their weapons and demanded all the visitors' wealth. Despite Blake's protests, he realizes that the founders never intended to honor the agreement. After regaining consciousness, Nick notices that Liz has disappeared and goes searching for her. She is found by Hank, and soon Nick and Andy arrive as well. When Nick orders everyone to run, Hank refuses to abandon his dogs, saying they are all he has left. However, upon learning that the creatures are approaching, the group moves on while the fog engulfs the island. Along the way, they reunite with Helen and race toward Town Hall. As they pass the founders' statues, Liz experiences another vision revealing the rest of the story. The founders betrayed Blake and his people, stole their possessions, and set their ship on fire, killing everyone aboard. Before dying, they swore revenge. Seeing Liz frozen in place, Nick carries her into Town Hall. Inside, Liz is finally reunited with her parents, but the moment is interrupted by the arrival of Spooner and Malone, who order everyone to lock the building. Liz then confronts the priest, revealing that she has uncovered the truth. Malone admits that Blake and his people were betrayed, and explains that the town was built upon the land that had been promised to them. He also states that the sins of the founders are now falling upon their descendants. Outraged, Tom refuses to believe him and insists that the founders were heroes. At that moment, Hank's body is hurled into Town Hall. Soon afterward, the fog invades the building, and everything connected to the founders begins to be destroyed. Liz's mother becomes one of the first victims while the survivors descend into panic. Malone attempts to retrieve the diary, but is reached by a creature and killed with shards of glass. Next, the creature approaches Helen and Andy, but shifts its attention to Tom, who is thrown into the cemetery. Seeing this, Liz runs to help him. In the cemetery, Tom is surrounded by the spirits and tries to convince them that he does not deserve such a fate. However, Blake shows no compassion and repeats the very same argument the founders once used. He then places the contract into Tom's hands, causing him to be burned alive instantly. Unsure of what to do, Nick and Liz attempt to move away from the area. However, Liz remains in the cemetery and ends up attracting the spirit's attention. Instead of fleeing, she walks toward Blake. When he reaches her, he holds her and, to everyone's surprise, kisses her. At that instant, Liz begins to take on the appearance of his former love, Elizabeth. Shortly afterward, Nick returns looking for her, but he can no longer stop her departure. Liz leaves with Blake and the other spirits as the fog begins to recede across the island. With the threat apparently over, Nick throws the diary into the ocean, bringing the story to an end.